Okay. Hello, everybody who's online. Can you hear as well? Erica, Emilia, Donnie?
Yes, we can hear.
Do you want to turn on your cameras so we can see you? Hello, Erica. Hello, Emilia. Adoni.
Hello.
Adoni, θα άνοιξε την κάμερά σου. Thank you.
Καλησπέρα, καλησπέρα.
Okay. So let me see. Oh, no, sorry. Let me see the audio. Who can see you? You are in the big screen behind my head. You're there. So yeah, you are up there or something like this. I'm not gonna make a mess. This is the audience for you, but you're gonna see me for now. I have done a mess here, but I think we'll sort it out. Okay, good. So let me see who is going first. We have 5 papers and 1 hour and 45 minutes. So my aim is to even have a short discussion at the end, as we had yesterday. But yesterday we had only 4 papers, though I was late for 20 minutes, so we hopefully we'll be able to compensate that. Sorry about it. So now I turn that off. I go to the panel and I see who is going to be first. So more panels is opening. Yep. So we're panel 5B, and according to the program, the first speaker is going to be Mike. No, is that true? Yeah, it is. Okay, it's going to be Michael Anwander. Is Michael here? Hi, Michael. Do you want to sit here? Do you want to sit there? Do you want to stand?
No, probably better next to the computer.
Okay, here you are then.
But
The mic is here by the camera, so if you want to sit somewhere, just move it across to that.
Okay.
So just to find the presentation. Sorry, I just. It actually should be on the screen already.
Is it in the?
It's open already. Yes,
Yeah.
you're right.
Michael, are you ready?
Yeah.
So the first
All right.
To share screen as well, or for the people online as well.
Okay, so thank you very much for having me. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to talk about a case study from my field, and I called the paper that I'm working on, Denying Support at a Toll Machine, Contested Hospitality at a Bulgarian Road Stop. And what I'm basically going to do with this presentation, or also with the paper done, is to explore the boundaries and the limitations of infrastructure-related customer support. And more specifically, I tried to make sense of sort of disruptive interactions that I found unfolding around a road tax collecting e-vignette terminal in Bulgaria at the road stop in Bulgaria. Yeah, I start with an ethnographic vignette, and then I try and push forward my argument. So it was a regular Tuesday morning, actually, when I was at this service area called Sunny Oil, and a man wearing a gray jogging suit and jumpers entered our gas station's shop. And from how he entered the shop, one could actually easily tell that he was actually in a hurry and that he was searching for something very specific. And like with his eyes, he scanned the interior of the shop, and then, but then decided to directly head to the cash desk. And there he quite without saying hello, without saying anything. He was straightforward, just saying taxata, which means the toll in Bulgarian, right? And Vanya, a colleague of mine, she actually waited for him to look up and to face him again. And then she pointed at a computer that was standing next to the coffee corner. And she said, na terminala, which means right at the terminal, right? But he insisted he wanted to buy it here, right at the cash desk, also because he wanted to pay in cash and he did not want to pay by card, right? So he asked whether he can buy it here, and the whole conversation was in very basic English because they both, from the very beginning on, they both knew that they are not sharing a language, basically. And then Vanya insisted that no, you actually can buy it only at the terminal and only at this computer. So somewhat exasperated, the driver, the long haul driver, he stepped towards the terminal and he started this whole process. And you basically know these sort of processes, right? You have to choose your vehicle, the language first, then the vehicle class, then the date, the starting date for the vignette, the duration for the vignette, and so on and so forth. And then the whole process ends with checking or screening these terms of conditions, and then you pay, basically, right? So during this whole process, the driver would continuously, or over and again, he would turn to Vanya and ask whether, is that fine, or is that what I should check here or tick here? And Vanya actually did not give him any sort of indications. She basically only told him that whatever he needs is to be found on the screen. Everything is written there. She does not want to have anything to do with that. And since I was standing next to the coffee corner, he would then turn to me, looking at me, whether I would support him with help. But I found myself like hunching my shoulders and nodding with my head and pressing my lips together. It's basically giving him also, or making him understand that I would also not help him, because I was told to not help him. I was told to not support him in this process. So to analyze this whole situation, I actually I was building on the concept, or I used the concept of hospitality that was like once unleashed by Kant already in the 18th century. Like it became sort of a standard concept also to talk about host and guest relationships. And obviously there are much newer conceptions about hospitality right now, and contemporary scholars basically worked a lot on the very distinctive forms and the codes, the practices of hospitality. They also there's also quite some body of literature, of course, on the hierarchy of hospitality. And the body of literature that was of most importance for me is the one that builds on hospitality in relation with mobility and stillness, of course. And just to highlight one quote, and also two scholars that I found most interesting here are Jenny Moulds and Sarah Gibson, for building on Ghassan's Hash work, also on the work on the hope of resting and then continuing a journey, right? So they say hospitality mobilizes the guest. It is the gift of staying still and moving forward. And if we understand it like that, also in the context of a service area, then it is really a lot about sticking to a schedule, to facilitating travel, and to make the driver drive again, right? So that's for the theoretical background, so that you can, yeah. I will continue with some forms of interactions now that I had or observed at the service area during this whole process of purchasing the e-vignette, and that was basically making fun, but also ghosting, and then finally removing. I start with the joking and with the making fun. So typically it took the driver 3 to 5 minutes to make their ticket, right? And this period of time, this could become a little bit longer when people would need to double check their registration plates, or when they had forgotten their credit cards in the driver's cabin, or when at the very end of the whole process, they received the notification that something was ticked in the wrong way, or it was incomplete, or there was a date missing, something like that. So in these cases, or whenever like the whole situations took a little bit longer and longer, then the drivers queuing up, they would actually become, sorry, I'm moving that a bit. The drivers would actually start being a little bit annoyed, and they would also make some, they would ask some questions that, from my point of view, also in the way that they asked the question, it was not serious questions that they were asking, but more ironic ones, like, do they actually control it? Do I need a tollway permit? Well, knowing that they actually need it if they want to continue the travel. And my colleagues at the service area, they would respond to these sort of questions in a sarcastic way, most likely, but or also sometimes in a consultative way, but sometimes also in a completely destructive way, or deconstructive way. Just an example here from Nikki, a colleague of mine. He was saying, well, you can drive without, but there are cameras checking for registration. So basically he was saying, well, you can, but you cannot. Or you can, but you will pay a fine right after you leave the city where you have these mobile checkpoints. Another example from a colleague of mine who was even more annoyed and not consultative at all in this situation was like, yes, sure, just continue driving, like without minding actually about this. The fact that he should have paid for it. And what goes with these, also with this sarcasm here, is really a lot of the employees and my colleagues' experiences with the Bulgarian state on the one hand, but then also feeling offended to some extent, you know, like by other drivers driving through, doing the logistics, not stopping over at the city, not being interested in the city, but just driving through, and then even thinking like they could, you know, like they could avoid paying the taxes that they actually need to pay. That's also something that they highlighted by themselves. Yeah, here you see one of these mobile checkpoints where then on the streets they would pick you out and make you pay the tax.
5 more minutes.
Yes. Yeah, sometimes then this dissatisfaction and these tensions, actually, they also led to complete disruptions of the interaction between the drivers and the employees at the gas station. And one of my colleagues, she actually was very mad about a person who was continued to beg for other people to lend them the credit card, because I told you, you cannot pay in cash, right? You need a credit card. So this person was standing and walking around the service area, begging people for lending them a credit card, right? And she was got really mad about this person, and she shouting at him, go out and come back when you have a card, or go to the city. There was the other point where you could actually buy one and buy it there. And then after that she had said that, or that she had been shouting at him, she completely ghosted this person. She turned away, and like Vanya in the very first vignette, turned away. Basically, she did something else. She continued other work, but she completely ignored this person. And yeah, and then later on, she explained to me, well, this is not a fun fair, and which is the fun fair is something that came out over and over again as a point of reference. Here we have a picture of the fun fair. So in the most.
The word in Bulgaria?
Pardon?
Fun fair.
Panayir. Yeah. So with throwing out and with ghosting people, the employees actually emphasized that buying the e-vignette was actually none of their business, right? They didn't want to have to do anything with that. And the reason why they would like avoid every sort of interaction also with this e-terminal was basically that that they were alienated from their actual work, right? They were not vendors, they were not mechanics anymore, but they had become some sort of state representatives or state agents that they actually didn't want to be. And they actually objected to that. And this shift in their position would also cause a shift in the hierarchies among the drivers and the employees, and to some extent then also suspend the solidarity between these different groups, which basically on the street they would always help each other. And it was also a basic function, right, or it is a basic function of the service area to be hospitable and to be solidary. So now I've talked about removing people. Now some words also about removing the e-terminal as such. Now, at one point it was basically March 14, and like it was a quite important date in 2020 because it was the one day that the Bulgarian Ministry of Health would actually announce anti-COVID measures, right? On that very day, as a reaction to these measures, they would remove the e-toll terminal from the shops inside and they would take it outside. The reason why they did so was basically that that people were constantly queuing up in front of this machine, and from now onwards you were allowed to have only one person in the shop inside at time. So so they either remove it or like the whole thing is taking even much longer. So so they removed it, and from this removal there actually resulted a whole bunch of shifts. So taking the terminal outside, it had an impact on the host-guest relationship because it resized the driver's demand for support, it weakened the tensions, and it did so also on a long term because it was still outside in 21 then. 1 more minute. Yeah, but it also made the toll machine a state thing again, a BG toll agency thing again, and not so much a Sunny Oil thing again. So it was, they actually, with removing it, they changed the belonging of this machine. And that was quite an important point. Yeah, let me conclude very quickly here in that sense. I think that the whole story here, or the whole narrative is very much about you know, like adding a new tool to something where we, or a new service to a place where we have a working solidarity and hospitality network, right? And with adding these new services, or an infrastructure service, basically we suspended, or they suspended this whole solidarity network. And I think that's a key point that I want to highlight in my work, and also that I want to highlight with looking at something or solidarity, or where solidarity stops working. And I think I finish here. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ricardo.
Thank you.
I would like quickly to invite our next speaker, who is Ali Mazukatov from Humboldt University.
Well, thank you for having me in this panel. Yes. I have a quick outline of my presentation. I'll start with my field of research, which is traffic transition, or Verkehrswende in German. Then I'm going to go to theory of urban commoning, then present my 2 case studies, which in the end, with a modest theoretical proposition, will turn to hopefully modes of commoning. So, the field. Political claims and politics of mobility centered around the buzzword Verkehrswende or Mobilitätswende, which translate to traffic transition or mobility turnaround. With reference to traffic transition, a wide range of activist mobilization practices and administrative policies have been set in motion. The 2018 mobility law was a milestone in this regard. Berlin was the first German state to introduce such a law, thereby making traffic planning primarily about public transport, bikes and pedestrians, and not cars. The law promises to promote an environmentally and socially responsible mobility, which is easily accessible, independent of age, gender, income, personal impairment, or ethnic origin. Probably most remarkable about the law is that its ideas originated in civil society attempts to hold a Berlin-wide referendum. Against this backdrop, several activists as Changing Cities or Popular German Bike Club are fighting for their traffic transition. This includes to make Vision Zero come true, which means safety for all users of mobility infrastructures and no deaths due to insufficient provisions. Also, activists fight for the proper implementation of the citywide network of priority bike lanes with a scope of 865 kilometers. Some initiatives even fight for banning private cars from the inner districts altogether. All actors, including administration, agree that without constant pressure from several civil society groups, neither the mobility law nor its proper implementation would be successful. To analyze the research field of traffic transition, I decided to turn my attention to theories of urban commoning. Early commons theory was empirically focusing on natural goods and resources, foremost in rural areas and/or the global south. Triggered by tightening austerity politics in the wake of the international financial crisis, social tensions arose, particularly in big cities. I'm thinking about insurrections as the Occupy movement or the Arab Spring and others, which have been raising ethnographic interest. With the urban uprisings, it became apparent that the focus just on natural resources was not sufficient. The analytical focus had to shift from rural to urban commons or commoning under urban conditions. In the introduction to the edited volume, Urban Commons, Moving Beyond State and Market, an author's collective contends that various, even classical definitions of the commons entail 3 main components. According to them, commoning is a social struggle that comprises a resource, a community, and institutions or rules which provide a context for their social struggle. The tripartite definition leads the authors to 3 important questions to ask in the examination of potential commons. What is the common resource? What are good practices and relevant relationships between commoners and different commons? And who belongs to the we of the community? With such a commoning perspective, urban commoning provides a fascinating framework to analyze social struggles which link economical, material, political, and social spheres. Furthermore, the turn from commons as resource to commoning as social process mirrors an analytical shift from infrastructures as foremost material constellations to infrastructuring as a process of interweaving the social and the material. Now, my first case study. Mid-August 2021, bike activists from Popular German Bike Club meet in the north of Berlin, including an ethnographer. Together, we will bike towards the city center along of Berlin's main highways. In the south, where Highway B96 leaves Berlin, a second group starts and we will meet them in the city center. After some kilometers, we stop and there are some speeches. In my field notes, I noted, Highway B69 does not have any good bike lanes in the northern district of Reinickendorf. The only piece that got renewed will be following, just 400 meters until Rödernallee. The rest is rubbish from the 80s, not up to date at all. Bikers in Berlin will always know when they enter Reinickendorf district, because that's the case when the green proper bike lanes end. We pass some more kilometers, entering Mitte district now, some of us admiring the proper infrastructure. While biking, I can overhear a conversation. A man says, "Look how nice it is," pointing to the broad bike lane painted green. He remembers the street in the past. There was no bike lane at all. Just 2 lanes for cars in each direction next to each other, one of them now being replaced by the new bike lane. The lane is green and I think it conforms to the standards defined by Berlin mobility law. The whole point of our bike tour was to demand steady bike lanes. The speeches on the way encourage us to pay attention to the infrastructures which are in a state of patchwork. The speeches educate us about different stages of infrastructural development and administrative obstacles to developing a proper network of bike lanes. That same popular German bike club organizes academies. In my example, an amendment for traffic rules was discussed, a new amendment. The beginning of the slide translates, the opening of one-way streets, sign 220, formerly just discretionary provision, was altered to a more mandatory ought to provision. From now on, bikers should be able to use one-way streets in opposite direction. My field notes note furthermore, our teacher adding, one should really try to generate a register of all one-way streets that have not been opened yet. There are some preconditions, but when they are met, one can file an application and refer to the new amendment. So teaching results in action. Our lesson was designed to be a blueprint to apply our newly acquired knowledge. We are not to wait, but urge administration to open one-way streets for bikers, thus help ourselves to make our city more bikeable. Oh, sorry, I skipped that second. So my second case study is about changing cities. Inspired by Barcelona's superblocks, Changing Cities advocates for neighborhood blocks or Kiezblocks in Berlin. The concept refers to banning transit traffic from neighborhoods, reallocating space to other modes of transport or leisure activities. By blocking side roads, for car traffic at least, cars are forced to use main roads of the area. Changing Cities organizes locally. In each neighborhood, the local activist group is urged to collect 1,000 signatures because those signatures provide a door opener for the debate in local district parliaments. In August last year, Changing Cities organized a citywide summit for those local groups to meet and exchange tactics. During the summit, people formed a parade with each district holding up a banner, marching through an improvised gate. The districts are called in order. Now it's Lichtenberg district's turn. There goes an O of all who identify with the district. From now on, other districts are motivated to follow Lichtenberg's example. When Friedrichshain-Kreuzberg gets called out, the subsequent hey is already a bit louder. As the entry of my field notes show, activists expressed their belonging to a district. After marching, people sat down on what usually is a very busy street and talked tactics and did some networking. Paper boxes were put as seats in concentric circles in front of Berlin City Hall. Changing Cities called that an open sky parliament. A community of citizens sits down and exchanges ideas about one of the most valuable resources, city space. Now back to theory. In my second part, I outlined a three-partite definition of commoning leading to questions about resource, community, and institutions. The authors urge us not to overlook crucial components of commoning. They show how questions of how natural resources are withdrawn from profit-oriented market fall short of some aspects of commoning, particularly under urban conditions of density and diversity, where questions of commoners and their institutions play a crucial role. To use their perspective leaves me with insights I summed up in the matrix for you. Some moments ago, I told you about popular German bike club and how they are trying to make traffic infrastructure bike accessible. To achieve that, they are trying to mold their members into a community of knowledgeable bikers and motivate them to be activist planners and get involved in planning process. I also told you about changing cities who fight to use city space not primarily for car traffic. The activists appeal to their neighborhood initiatives to use participatory mechanisms of democratic participation. Not to end up in descriptive case studies, though, that are hardly relating to each other on theoretical level, I propose to add means of mobilization to the matrix. After all, I'm not only interested in describing a community of commoners, but to emphasize commoning as a distinguished process of collectivization, which is analytically distinct from other collectivizing processes and on other scales, such as the nation state. But I'm also interested to relate the two examples to each other, pointing out the tactics and the specificities of the social struggles my protagonists are leading. This includes showing the specific position of their political struggle vis-à-vis market and state. Therefore, by including means of mobilization prominently in my analysis, I'm able to show tactical uses of political, economical, and social orders and how actors inscribe themselves within them. This would also help realize the goal of the edited volume I mentioned earlier, to describe commons not as some process beyond state and market, but make it a specific collectivizing process and meshed within the logics of market and state. In this perspective, popular German bike club tries to gather expertise and disseminate knowledge to make infrastructures legible. A bike lane ending at administrative zones is therefore not just an obstacle for a smooth ride, but can be read as the result of poor planning. Similarly, a one-way street might be read as administration running late of adhering to the newest standards and opening it for bikers. To appeal to urban planners within the administration, the knowledge disseminated is needed to intervene. Activists would need to speak planners' language to set concrete steps towards a more bikeable city.
One more minute, Enrique.
Yes, I'm about to finish. Changing cities, on the other hand, appeals to democratic notions of right to the city. By enacting an open sky parliament with initiatives from different areas of the city, activists claim a crucial role in making decisions about urban mobility infrastructures. Choosing the spot right in the city's political heart transports the political claim symbolically that democratic representatives should take demands of grassroots and civil society NGOs seriously. By blocking a usually very busy street, they create a sort of preview of the aspired future. City space is thus not only object of the discussion, but one of the crucial means to make their vision more tangible. By participating, people make an experience that already realizes urban space with less car traffic. City space is thus actively mobilized to create an experience of what urban space with less cars looks and feels like. So thank you for your attention. And this is some more DIY traffic transition. We've built the benches sort of to block car parks or to use space more wisely. And this is also some prefiguration. There's a prefigurated tram, it's more like a bike, but the tram is to come in the 2030s, I guess. Yeah, thank you.
And we're going to go to our next speaker, who is Erika Takahashi. Erika, can you hear us?
Yes.
Excellent.
Could you stop the sharing?
I will immediately.
Okay. I'll try to share my slide. Can you see
Yes,
it?
we can.
Okay. And now it's slideshow, right? Okay. Okay, let me start. Hello, everyone. Greeting from Tokyo. I'm actually a medical anthropologist based in Japan and doing my field work in Finland. But recently I spent my sabbatical year in Finland and just stumbled upon this very interesting practice of mating ferries. So today I would like to talk about this. Infrastructure is a concept closely connected to nation state. It has been analyzed as a device for development, modernization, and reinforcement of nation state. In that regard, infrastructure is fundamentally public. Therefore, when states intervene in the formation and maintenance of infrastructure, a distinction between the private and public domains of the infrastructure is created. So the policymakers identifies the collective need of the people to determine the public and or private nature of service. So if public infrastructure involves comparison, how does a comparison create solidarity among people in need of transportation and inevitably discrepancy among them? To answer this question, today I would like to talk about this political campaign by private road associations for ferries in Finland and how their socio-technical, geographical, and environmental articulation of, I actually can't see my slide, of private ferry routes are woven into each of their rationales for nationalization, and how the public social services are provided or denied for those who live beyond these private ferry routes. By describing that, I will try to show you the conflicting relationship between our Nordic welfare states, private infrastructure, and fragile solidarity based on ideals such as autonomy and citizenship. The ethnographic data shown in this paper is obtained by my fieldwork in so-called archipelago town of Finland. I've been visiting this town since 2001. Mainly I've been working with elder care sector, but then I started researching about this ferry transport and mobility of care since 2020. To understand what is private road association and why it is involved with ferries, I have to explain the legal definition of roads in Finland. Most important thing is public roads are free in Finland. According to Highway Act, Finland does not take tolls on highways, and ferries constitute part of highways, so they are also free of charge. Then there is this everyone's right. This law allows everyone the freedom to roam. So you can go to forest, pick up mushrooms or berries, such kind of thing. So the recreational use of natural areas is a right for everyone. So in some, roads are free of charge and the roadless areas are also free to roam. These rules apply to the sea too. Finland is a country with many islands and lakes. There are 76,000 islands and 56,000 lakes. In the coastal areas and the lake district of Finland, there are many ferries connecting these islands, and they are also free of charge usually. And there are also transportation boats which carry small number of passengers. The court judged in 2009 that it is unconstitutional to take tolls on these boats. In addition to ferries and transportation boats, people also own small boats and freely cross the sea without using any public ferries. So the public transportation on sea are free of charge, and people have freedom to roam the roadless or routeless areas on sea. However, there is private roads in between these public roads and roadless areas. In Finland, there is a distinction between public roads and private roads. So, for example, public paths and lanes to houses are usually private. Public roads are maintained by governments, while private roads are maintained by private roads associations. And as I already told, most ferry routes are highways, so they are free, and they are public. But there are currently 21 ferry routes in Finland, which are private roads. The ferries on these routes are operated by private road associations. Private road ferries are not free of charge. Members of the association have to pay the membership fee, and other passengers have to pay also the small charge. In Archipelago town, there are 4 ferry routes which are currently classified as a private road. These routes are to 4 islands, which I just named as Salmon Island, Cattle Island, Corn Island, Summer Cottages Island. They are all alias anyway. So these islands are connected to the main islands by ferries operated by private roads associations. These private roads ferries are, in a way, a remnant of pre-Nordic welfare states, or so the political campaigners of these islands think. This is how the member of the private roads associations for ferries in Archipelago town started a political campaign. Until 5 years ago, Jari had been satisfied with how private road ferries were operated. However, the government announced that they plan to cut down the support of these private road cost from 80% to 50%. There were many protests, so the government withdrew the plan. However, because of this incident, people started asking, why do we have to pay the fee to begin with? So Jari wrote a petition for the Summer Cottages Island where he lives, and he also contacted other 3 private roads associations in Archipelago town. Eventually, all the private road associations for ferries in Finland joined this group. He had been a leader of this group for 1.5 years. Then he quitted it in 2020 because a local delegation of politicians denied the idea of making these private road ferries into public. Therefore, he decided to talk to the Finnish media as a private person, and then he answered to this interview in Yle, which is like a national broadcasting. When the people demanded the ferry route to be public, there are logics for nationalization.
Erika, you
Notably,
have 4 minutes, eh?
Okay.
Okay.
They criticize the ambiguity of boundaries. Why are the transportation boats free while the private road ferry are to be maintained by the private road associations? Where is the boundary between the private ferries and the public ferries? There is no official definition so far. It is not because they don't want to pay money, they often explain. It is not a matter of money, we have to take responsibility for ferry drivers. It is too much responsibility. It is wrong on equality point of view. Such kind of explanation they make. However, there are also the hesitance towards the public road ferry. If it's made into the public, a lot of tourists might come to these islands. And then also, if the public ferries are usually more inconvenient, there is a ferry route which became public about 10 years ago. The service frequency has been reduced since then. So that's why people are a little bit hesitant. And it's true, it's not only money, but maintenance of ferries is quite tiresome. And but I think I should skip a little bit about that. But then there are also a difference between these 4 islands, because summer cottage islands, there are 11 households which stays in the island throughout the year, and all the other households are summer cottages. And then in other 3 islands, there are prominent private enterprises. Like Salmon Island, there is salmon farming, Corn Island, corn farming, and then in Cattle Island, they are raising cattle. So you can see that the price is very different in each island. And then these enterprises in the island, they have to pay much more expensive cost, like 10,000 euro per year. And if the position between the 2 piers are difficult, then they cannot use a cable for the ferries, then the fee for the passengers become much more expensive. So from here we can see that why they are these 4 ferry routes are private. If there are prominent private enterprises in small islands, these routes are regarded to be private. Also, if there are many summer cottages, these islands are regarded to be also private or less public, because municipal services are provided to the address of permanent residents in Finland. So they are not community enough. And actually, if we see that private services are usually provided at only until the public road, so the school bus or postal service only comes to the pier of the ferry, and there is no home care services in these areas. Once there was a temporary home nursing service, but that's all. Medical helicopters are available to everyone. And I have to talk a little about current situation, because this political campaign is pending. Minister of Transport and Communications announced the National Transport System Plan in September 2021. So the ministry will visit all the private road ferry to examine the possibility of building bridges on this route, but it's not clear how long does it take to do that. So it took 10 years so far, and we don't know how long it's going to take. I am almost given up, Jari said. So the Finnish political culture and the fundamental vastness of the problem made the campaigners feel like this issue is beyond their hand. So what divides the public and private nature of the ferry route? When there are many people living on the island, the ferry routes are regarded to be public. So if there are communities, the roads become public. So because they are private enterprises and summer cottage in these islands, they are regarded to be not community, not public roads. Because the municipalities must provide
Erika, you have
services.
1 more minute.
Okay, that's fine. Public services to those citizens who live in these islands. They are reluctant to grant permission to live permanently in remote areas. So they don't want these summer cottages to become permanent residents. And that's because they want these roads to be private. So in a way, private roads ferries draw out the outer edge of the municipal services. And also when we think about equality of public services, when compared with other transportation, the legitimization for ferries to be kept private is destabilized. Because there is a cattle launch in an island connected by a transportation boat, and they don't have to pay the fee for the moving cattle. There are also summer cottages in main island, and they don't have to pay. So in the campaign, by comparing we with others, the residents of the 4 islands invoke the logic of equality. However, the solidarity based on the comparison is too weak, because inevitably they also find differences among them within these 4 islands. So the slow process of the nation state also made them lose the momentum of campaign. So in a way, solidarity and infrastructures are intertwined to each other in dividing public-private ferries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Erika. And I would like to go to the next paper on infrastructures, a critical aspect of self-organized entrepreneurial activity, by Emilia Chranopoulou, Andonis Papangelopoulos, and Theophanis Papageorgiou. You guys with long Greek names, you're next. So please.
Okay. We sent you a video, but since the connection is okay, we could present online if you would like. We could present.
Yeah, please do present us. We prefer you to present us rather than watching a video.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. Tell me if you see it.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. And now it's full screen.
Can you see the audience?
Yes, yes, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so I will be presenting our research titled "Is Infrastructure a Critical Aspect of Self-Organized Entrepreneurial Activity?" which we conduct in collaboration with Andonis Papangelopoulos and Theophanis Papageorgiou. Balancing between the principles of self-organized production and the rules of the capitalist market has long been a matter of concern for self-managed enterprises.
Emilia, can you hear me? You have to start your PowerPoint because we see now we see it.
I think it started, but you cannot see it.
No, we can see it, but you will have to go to presentation basically. I'm trying to see here. Προβολή παρουσίασης. You have to go to προβολή παρουσίασης.
You don't see it now? No.
We don't see it as presented. No, just προβολή παρουσίασης. Yeah, exactly.
Τώρα γιατί δεν το βλέπω.
Ποιο λες, Χρήστο? Προβολή διάφρωσης. Από την αρχή που λέει. Από την αρχή, αυτό.
Ωραία. Thank you.
Sorry for the Greek.
Okay.
No, haven't started it again. You have to go full screen.
I have, but I don't know why it doesn't start.
That's it. Let's see if it's gonna do it this time, the trick. No, it doesn't seem like it's working. Anyway, you just please make sure you manually move from one slide to the other then, yeah?
Okay, so now you see the second slide, do you?
Yeah.
Okay, so I will leave it like this, and I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on. Okay. Balancing between the principles of self-organized production and the rules of the capitalist market has long been a matter of concern for self-managed enterprises. In such endeavors, even though capitalist modes of labor organization, administration, and management are expelled from the workplace, circulation remains tied to dominant forms of production. Forms of material and immaterial infrastructure, such as machinery and real estate, as well as networks of clients, suppliers, creditors, operating within the boundaries of the capitalist market, seem to act as a gravitational field, that curtails their emancipatory potential. Following this field of attention, our questions in this ongoing research are as follows. How does infrastructure relate to self-management? What alternative notions of infrastructure emerge? How does it determine the viability of self-organized enterprises? Starting from the research question of viability of self-managed enterprises in the context of the capitalist market and the role of infrastructure in achieving a sustainable and radical alternative, we followed the next methodological steps. We listed the main threads of the Marxist debate on the radicality of self-managed enterprises when met with the need for their simultaneous viability. Turning to infrastructure as a key factor in this debate, we followed definitions of infrastructure as material and relational, so to delineate the respective fields of study. Through a literature review, we studied the example of occupied factories in Argentina. The extensive field studies of self-managed projects in Latin America created the basis for a categorization of infrastructure and the role it plays in the case of WRCs. We further defined broad categories of infrastructure and the challenges or opportunities they raise in the Argentinian example. Following that, we formulated the questions of an open-ended interview conducted with the workers of the Viome factory in Greece in order to examine how these issues materialize in this endeavor so as to answer the research question posed at the beginning of the study. Before we delve into the case studies, we will present briefly our theoretical framework concerning conceptualizations of infrastructure that we employed. Beyond material settings such as machinery, immovable property, or logistics hardware, a more inclusive description of infrastructure may also encompass established networks of communication, access to services and information, and selective affiliations between groups. In the same vein, a significant part of the recent literature has emphasized the relational nature of infrastructure as the socio-material context that facilitates the existence of a functioning assemblage. Those perspectives that we found critical in our research describe infrastructure as an architecture of circulation and as a system rather than single objects, as an exchange between heterogeneous elements, making them relatable within a systemic modus operandi, as a form of governance and point of intersection between state and speculative interests, and finally as a spatio-temporal hyperobject. In examining the functions and viability of WRCs, we can therefore hypothesize that the domain of infrastructure extends far beyond the typical means of production towards the sphere of material and immaterial interconnections that make running a business possible. In the face of adversities that emerge within the organization of market economies, it seems that WRCs find themselves cut off from a range of mechanisms of circulation that is the infrastructural substratum that makes their operation possible. Following the study of the Argentinian model provides us with an array of categories of infrastructural challenges that WRCs face. We claim that those challenges can be divided into two main categories. First, the material demonstrations of infrastructure, such as upkeep and replacement of machinery, space acquisition and management, as well as logistics capacities. And second, access to material networks, such as flows of credit, supply chains, and welfare provisions, such as insurance rights. A predominant tendency in infrastructure management within the WRCs in Argentina lies in compensating for the obstacles provided by the realities of free market with two infrastructure-related sets of practices. The first is the reliance in alternative forms of moral economy, that is, forms of collaboration with individuals and collective entities that eschew aspects of market economy, such as issues of access, use of resources, and prices. The second refers to strategies of compensating for the absence of required infrastructure by contributing personal labor, risk-taking, and accountability. That is, sharing a portion of the functions typically executed by means of standard infrastructure. The Argentinian example is closely linked to the case of the recuperation of the Viome factory in Greece in 2013. Notwithstanding the differences in scale and particular context, similar challenges and responses seem to emerge. Elements of existing infrastructure in material and immaterial terms are altered, rearranged, and reconnected with alternative nodes, producing thus a new map of connections of interoperability and cooperation. Our first area of study included the material infrastructure that refers to machinery and the production line, as well as immovable property. After the recuperation, Viome chose to abandon their established construction materials line and instead produce clean products. This would allow them to use a portion of the factory's existing machinery and production methods. This opened up a route towards retail markets where the support of the movements and individuals who stand in solidarity could have considerable impact. Furthermore, solidarity initiatives seem to replace the disrupted access to networks of basic utilities. In March 2020, the power supply to the factory came under threat as the authorities declared that power to the plant would be cut off. The collective addressed the public to join them in solidarity and financially support the purchase of an industrial power generator so that production continues. In terms of immovable property, the factory was transformed from a workplace to a makeshift community center through the organization of events, festivals, and other initiatives. The opening of the site to the community has reinforced the struggle against confiscation processes by the state, which were postponed indefinitely due to pressure by the solidarity movement that embraced Biome. Following the shifts in material settings, we traced the network reconfigurations, but firstly focusing on access to lines of credit. As was mentioned in the interview conducted, Biome has not considered growing their invested capital, either through lending mechanisms or through external investment. Instead, a portion of the cooperative's income is directed towards acquisition of new machinery and repairs as required. Moreover, due to limitations in cash and cash equivalents, the factory is not able to stockpile raw resources other than those required for immediate production, and due to a relatively low volume of expected turnover and market uncertainties, is not able to secure lower prices for their raw material supplies. Client and supplier networks were also a matter of renegotiation. The collective opted to offer a retail product that would easily circulate within solidarity networks and open-air markets, reaching individual and small-scale enterprises. Building on this initial support, Biome sought for ways to deliver their product by their own means, therefore bypassing middlemen. In the same vein, they collectively decided not to address systemic players such as supermarket chains. Despite their gradual expansion, a considerable portion of their customer base is predicated upon solidarity networks. In terms of administration and labor organization, Biome follows a horizontal structure. All kinds of administrative decisions are taken by the General Assembly. Even though this process is time-consuming and renders direct decision-making more difficult, it is preferred as it guarantees the endeavor's coherence. As decision-making is spread equally across the collective, specialized and administrative tasks are also distributed across the members. It follows that workers had to adapt to a new regime of task allocation and handle internal governance, as the administrative staff did not participate in the cooperative effort. Also, assistance regarding highly skilled labor reached Biome in form of support by networks of solidarity, as the enterprise received know-how on the chemical composition of its newly introduced organic detergents production by trained chemical engineers from Italy and Greece, who offered their help in solidarity. Concluding with the institutional framework and interactions with state agencies, the state neither endorses or persistently suppresses the collective's activities. However, there is no institutional framework regulating the WRCs in Greece. Instead, Biome operates under the regime of social and cooperative enterprises, which covers its retail operation but does not offer any provisions regarding its productive activities. Substituting forms of fundamental infrastructure with practices of solidarity or creating alternative networks of funding and logistics based on solidarity seem to constitute a working reality for Biome. To conclude this presentation, it seems that questions of viability are therefore inextricably linked to the possibility of access to critical infrastructure for emerging or established WRCs. The Argentinian ecosystem of WRCs, as well as the standalone Greek factory Biome, despite their diverging scale and historical setting, seem to share not only similar infrastructure-related challenges, but also similar methods of compensating for them. Firstly, relying heavily on an alternative network of immaterial infrastructure that facilitate continuous access to client suppliers, moral and financial support. That implies that their viability is predicated upon forms of a continuous political struggle that replaces existing market mechanisms and therefore partly shields those endeavors from intervention. It follows that in order to imagine a WRC as an expansive universe, evolving into a broad paradigm, one would need to assume a substantial growth of networks of solidarity and political support to the cooperative economy. Secondly, replacing critical infrastructure by embodying infrastructural functions or soft infrastructure that is shifting across multiple roles, personal liability and risk-taking, compensating for lack of machinery and logistics with personal labor, collective management of health insurance and unemployment provisions, seems to place an additional burden on the collectives. The gradual withdrawal of the welfare state from critical fields of intervention, such as labor relations, social welfare, health provisions, and unemployment management, exposes the cooperatives to unmitigated risk. Along with the emancipatory potential in WRCs lies the peril of creating, through an oblique pathway, new forms of entrepreneurship of the self-modes of operation. It follows that since WRCs occupy a gray zone between market economy and informal networks of resistance and solidarity, their position within the market is not secure by terms of competition, but is rather protected by the grassroots political processes originating either within them or from their immediate political and social ecosystem. On the contrary, engaging in processes of capital accumulation, something that both Argentina and WRCs and POME refuse to do, that is pursuing growth through reinvestment of earnings or utilizing external capital, while concurrently reintroducing typical wage labor and institutional modes of organization, who cut them off their solidarity support networks and would expose them to the risk of market economy, as is the case with any other enterprise. WRCs seem to face a double bind, that is either replacing a critical infrastructure with support and solidarity and cope with chronic challenges that seem to persist irrespective of time and scale, or engage in processes of capital accumulation that may result in their alienation with the political movement that supports them. Acknowledging their symbolic importance, their capacity to form environments of resistance and commoning, and the direct solutions they offer in contributing to the cooperators' livelihoods, we argue that WRC should be perceived as an important yet precarious moment in a course of struggles and transformations, instead of a model that may independently lead to a paradigm shift while guaranteeing workers' autonomy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emilia and the rest of the team. And I would like to invite now Dolores Senyorans on neighborhood sweat soaps and collective politics. You can't stop sharing your screen now, Emilia.
Yes, I am trying. Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
I had a PowerPoint somewhere.
Yeah. You want to take away the USB stick?
Yeah.
Nice. Cool.
Oh, fine. Okay. Hello, good morning. The paper I want to share with you today is part of an ongoing research that I'm carrying out on popular economies and collective labor politics in Argentina as a postdoc at the Department of Social Anthropology at the University of Cambridge. And particularly in this paper, I wanted to contribute to the general discussion in the panel, drawing on some reflections that I developed through a research collaboration with other colleagues and researchers in Latin America, as part of a group that, if we translate it to English, it would be called the Reinvention of the Commons, that it's supported by the Consejo Latinoamericano de Ciencias Sociales. Okay. So within this research group, what we are intending to develop is a shared reflection on current social and labor movements in the region through the theoretical lens of the commons. So I wanted to first acknowledge that much of what I'm going to be presented comes from a dialogue that we've been sustaining for a couple of years now. Now, my current project draws on ethnographic fieldwork that I have been doing since 2016 with migrant garment workers who are part of an important informal sector trade union in Argentina. So before I dive into what I specifically prepared for today and for this panel, I first wanted to give you a little context about the union I worked with. So it's called the Union of Workers of the Popular Economy, and it was created in 2011 by some of the largest social movements in the country, many of which have a long history of struggle against neoliberal reforms in Argentina since the 1990s and early 2000s. And the union was created to represent workers in what they have defined as the popular economy, those that, having been excluded from the formal labor market, have had to invent their own work to survive. So it basically brings together street vendors, waste pickers, small farmers, and garment workers, which is particularly the sector I've been doing research with. And the union's main demand has been the recognition of basic labor rights for these workers, such as pension contributions, health insurance, and sick leave, but obviously also to increase income and improve the working conditions in each one of these sectors. But of course, the form in which that was done varies greatly depending on the sector we're talking about, and the process of organizing the textile or garment sector within the framework of the union began particularly towards the end of 2015, because that year the dangerous living and working conditions in the textile sweatshops that are the main production site of the industry were once again at the center of public attention as a result of a fire that took place in a sweatshop in the city of Buenos Aires, in which 2 small children died. And this was the second case, because there was another one in 2006. And what this brought to light crudely is that
the children who died?
no, they were with their parents who were working in the home, because these are mainly family, yeah. But what was brought to light by that fire again was that most of the garments we buy and use in the country are produced in sweatshops that are located in very precarious housing, with deficient electrical installations, which makes obviously for extremely risky working conditions. So for this sector, the union's proposal was to create what they call polos textiles, which are common workspaces registered as cooperatives with safe conditions that allowed the workers to move their activities out of the family home into these polos. And every worker took their own machines and they started working together with various degrees of coordination amongst the group that came together to create them. But today, and to contribute to a general discussion in the panel, as I said, I wanted to refer to a particular aspect that emerged while doing fieldwork together with the cooperatives that are located in the southern periphery of the city of Buenos Aires, and particularly in the vicinity of La Salada, which is the largest popular market in the country. All the southern periphery of the city is very well known for its rapid urban growth through popular urbanization, especially through land occupations that took place strongly from the 1980s onwards. But this area in particular has had a notorious growth in recent years due to the influx of this market and the work and business opportunities that it opened up. So I arrived in this area thanks to Fanny, which is the woman you can see standing at the front of her house in the picture. And because she's the president of the Federation of Garment Workers within the union and also the president of one of its member cooperatives. So since 2016, much of my fieldwork involved accompanying her in the everyday routines of her cooperative, but also in her role as the coordinator of a community space that she helped to create and sustain in her neighborhood, which is called Gabriel Miró. The occupation that gave rise to this neighborhood was in 2006, and Fanny, who had arrived from Paraguay in the late 1980s, had been one of the first inhabitants, and she took place in the land occupation, but she was also had been one of the most active residents in the struggle to resist eviction and to improve the living conditions of her neighbors, which included centrally the struggle for basic services and the creation of community infrastructures. So taking the case of this occupation and the building of this neighborhood, in this paper, what I wanted to do was to reflect on the production of places to live and community infrastructures as practices of commoning that sought to counteract forms of inequality, dispossession, and commodification to forge lives with dignity. And I see the commons not as a crystallized resource, but rather as a practice, a verb that moves beyond the romantic or idealized views of the commons, to also give an account of its complex overlaps with logics of exchange and market value. Some other of the colleagues been pointing out in the same direction. But also the interactions between the common and the uncommons, as Placer and de la Cadena have pointed out. And I think that ethnography gives us a privileged point of view to explore these processes of commoning, capturing their open and experimental character, while also being attentive to its challenges, contradictions, and often ambivalent nature. And with respect to infrastructures, in particular in this paper, I'm drawing on anthropological conceptualizations that understand them as forms of sociality that allow for the reproduction of life. And to me, the notion of people as infrastructure put forward by Simone and that of fatigue labor developed by Julia Liachar have allowed me to try to move beyond the naturalization of material objects to reflect on how these materialities condense social relations, but also form part of a network that connect people, objects, spaces, and practices. So to this aim, and to try to stick to the presentation time, I want to comment very briefly on 3 related arguments that I hope will contribute to the collective discussion in the panel. And one first point I would like to propose is that the building of this neighborhood involved the production of a common infrastructure for life and work that is both relational and material, and that it was connected to capital accumulation insofar as it allowed the formation of family workshops whose production ultimately fed the industry's value chains. Because on those lands, families found a place where they could realize their aspirations of progress, as they often said, of having a house of their own property, and to stop paying rent in the city, but also of becoming independent workers by setting up their own family workshops and stitching directly for manufacturers that later sold in La Salada. But also life and work in the neighborhood required the installation of secure services, and through the development of neighborhood political organization with block delegates, which is a very common form of political organization in popular neighborhoods in Argentina, they managed to get the state and private companies to carry out the infrastructural work to guarantee the provision of water and, above all, electricity, which is fundamental for textile work. Now, these political struggles materialize in concrete objects that Fanny always pointed out to me on our walks through the neighborhoods, such as water pipes or the electricity transformers that you can see in the pictures. But it's important to mention that the families not only mobilized the state and private companies, but they also invested their own labor and the income they obtained in the market through their work, often putting into play forms of community savings in order to build some of these material improvements, such as paying for rubble trucks to level the streets or buying cables to connect effectively the electricity. But the industry appropriated the value produced by these unpaid practices and networks of relations that are linked to social reproduction, which allowed the construction of these infrastructures. So this is why I propose to think about these infrastructures as ambivalent, in a way similar to what Julia Liachar has highlighted in her analysis of development projects in Egypt, because as she claims, this social infrastructure is based on her own terms on fatigue labor that open up communicative channels and sustain life, operated both as a commons, as a semiotic commons, as she puts it, but also can potentially, and in her case, they were in fact privatized to channel other economic projects oriented around the pursuit of profit, which is something very similar to what I could observe during my fieldwork. Now, a second point I would like to make is that the process of building these common infrastructures intertwined individual and family aspirations and market logics with collective dynamics and community organizing in a non-contradictory way. Because in the course of the construction of this neighborhood, the aspirations of improving family life by gaining access to a plot of land and a house of one's own were articulated early on with the desire to have spaces for collective use open to the community. So a large plot of land was preserved to build a community center, and a group of residents organized themselves to carry out its management, which is the space you can see in the picture. But building and sustaining this common space was not a linear process at all, and in fact it faced important challenges, because the demand for land to build new houses continued while its availability decreased, and the increase in the land's market value led to speculation and to the occupation of this piece of land by a group that intended to sell it. However, a group of residents resisted its commodification, and finally they managed to keep a small portion of the land where they effectively built this community center that was later on sustained. So thirdly, what I wanted to suggest is that what later happened in the space of that community center and the political experimentations that followed show an open character of commoning as a practice, as their efforts and relationships built also had an expected effects. Because as I mentioned before, in 2015, the union was initiating the creation of this textile branch within it and the development of the cooperatives. And as Fanny often told me, the struggle of the cooperative began with the struggle of the neighborhood. Because in fact, it was there in the context of the resistance to eviction that Fanny and other neighbors had met the activists who later promoted the formation of the union. And the activists had been central actors in obtaining the approval of an expropriation law that put an end to the fears of being evicted, but they had also helped to sustain the community space by organizing a soup kitchen and activities for the children. So it was there that for the first time they proposed to set up a cooperative with the neighbors, and that was the first cooperative to be created, and that was essentially what kickstarted the path of building the Federation of Garment Workers that would seek to improve and guarantee rights and better conditions for workers in this sector. So that proposal sealed the convergence of apparently unconnected processes, and in the course of this political experimentation, the space of the community center gained again new momentum, and it was transformed into a childcare facility that sought to guarantee the labor right based on the care for children during the workday, while also remaining open to other children that live nearby. So in other words, the struggles for place enabled a process of politicization of their working conditions and for the demand for labor rights. But it is also worth mentioning that the union developed specific actions to address living conditions in the neighborhoods, to access land ownership and improvements in the provision of services. And in this sense, the union proposed and achieved the passing of a national law that made it possible to carry out a census of popular neighborhoods all across the country. More than 4,000 neighborhoods were surveyed. And this census for the first time gave residents a certificate to prove their legitimate residence. And later on in 2019, improvement works began as part of a national plan for social and urban integration of all of these neighborhoods that were surveyed. So finally, and to close up, I wanted to reflect and try to very briefly answer one of the questions that was put forward by this panel, which said, do emerging or existing infrastructures facilitate or hinder solidarity and commoning? And of course, this is an empirical question that has to be answered through careful and situated ethnographic analysis, but drawing on my own research, I would argue that in these popular neighborhoods, the production of this material and relational infrastructures had an ambivalent nature, and that the possibilities to open up practices of commoning depended upon political experimentations and its unexpected outcomes. Because on the one hand, the production of places to live, as I said, of this material and relational infrastructures was necessary condition for the production of value, and it was privatized or appropriated by capital. But the struggle for these material aspects of popular urbanization also fueled the development of a vibrant network of personal and political relationships that opened up possibilities for collective organization. So I believe that analyzing these infrastructures as both material and relational is ultimately what sheds light on its ambivalent nature, as they condense power relations, but are therefore also key points of political struggle. And lastly, I would like to emphasize again that thinking of commoning as an open process of political experimentation, I believe it allows us to move beyond romantic views and often assume dichotomies such as individual, collective, solidarity, or calculation, as it shows how they intertwine desires, aspirations, and individual rights with common initiatives, dealing both with the state and the market. So to paraphrase Blaser and de la Cadena's formulation, I think that commoning and the production of the commons always depends upon the framing and the incorporation of the uncommon in the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good question. Good discussion.
Well, it was your question.
Yeah, I know, that's why. So it is land, labor, and techo is the roof. Right. Okay. Do colleagues on Zoom, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, let me see where you are. Yes, I'm opening you. Here you are. I can see you all. Yes. So I come from a good village. Okay, excellent. Do you want to start the conversation? First of all, I would like to ask if there are any questions. Sorry, do you want to have a conversation here? Do you want to have a question, objection, or comment to the papers, anybody? Okay, then maybe I can start. I want to start with the question if existing infrastructures do hinder solidarity or commoning, and I invite all the speakers who spoke in the previous 2 days, today and yesterday, to have, if they want to comment on that question. Well, but you are fine. You're excluded. What about the rest of you, Christoph? Yeah, you need the microphone.
Mainly just a question about, for Dolores, in terms of infrastructure and commoning. Okay, what kind of, you said the kind of collectivities that were emerged, other kind of more institutional base, like the labor union or in the local base of the residents there. But do they formalize in some way a kind of more common kind of political infrastructures of decision making about what they do, or it is just they collaborated to make their own infrastructures, but then privately each one kind of use them accordingly to their own personal needs, because there it is a tension that they translate in one part the need, they responded in one part collectively to or in a kind of more commoning way to an individual and collective need, but at the same time when it came to they benefited, they used in individual terms the benefits that came out of this common infrastructure, which is something similar that was happening with the open source and the kind of platform capitalism, etc. As you know, most of the even Google 90% is based on open source knowledge, but they completely they privatize all the profit that comes out of the use of this infrastructure. Yeah, because I think this is a very key element in terms of also of understanding commoning as a process that integrates the political, the social, and the economic towards a different social order, let's say, or ordering of the world.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But two things, I think I have like two main points regarding that. One is that when we think about families' involvements and neighbor residents' involvements in this kind of struggles, my invitation is to consider individual aspirations and their, desires to have a better life, their own homes, etc., as part of a commoning process. So to try to move beyond this idea that the individual and the collective have to be two separate entities, but to consider how both things are related actually, and how they struggle to improve their own lives together and individually. And then regarding privatization, I would consider that in relation to the industry, because obviously these sweatshops that were set up in their own homes in the neighborhoods, they're the least privileged part of the value chain. So yeah, obviously they took advantage to that to make a living, to provide food for the families. But what I'm trying to point out is that they are ambivalent in the sense that they allow to improve life, but they're also feeding this accumulation of capital, which is massive, and which is also what the union is trying to struggle against, to improve their conditions and their take in the chain. But yeah, I absolutely agree.
Can I have, do you have any other comments, questions, or objections? Yorgo, you need to come up here in the microphone.
About the question that you posed, right? So the question was if infrastructures hinder or promote solidarity or something like that. I don't think this is the right question to ask. It's like, it's like asking if, solidarity or resistance exists, or if it's all about power dominating and prevailing. Obviously, it's both.
Come closer to the mic.
Right. In the historical process, because history still goes on, it's both. It always have been both. So the question is not if either or the honor either exists or prevails, but how we can theorize this whole dialectics of power and resistance within the infrastructures. We have to admit that from now on, as digital infrastructures mainly, are emerging and proliferate, that all these dialectics should exist and we should think about them within the infrastructures and not outside. And this is the main question. For example, in my case, as I said yesterday, the citizens of Greece were not convinced to behave during COVID because of some ideological indoctrination or discourse that said to them, please be individuals and not come together and don't socialize. They were made to do that because of the possibilities given by the smartphones. Because the state tell them you have to have a confirmation SMS in order to go outside. And if you don't, you will be punished. So either they wanted or not, it was not a case of ideology, it was a case of possibilities made by the settings themselves, by the infrastructures. The same was, in my case at least, with labor and labor resistance and labor deregulation. It was not because the unions were weak, it was because that the people, the delivery riders were going out to be freelancers. It was because of the possibility given by the platforms. So they were, in a sense, made, again, beyond their consciousness to do that. And again, the resistance was through the infrastructures and not used as tools.
Was it through the infrastructure, through the resistance? Because it was a typical labor organization. Your example yesterday was talking about a typical, like the examples that Dolores brought. They were typical old school strike, basically a typical old school.
Yes,
but what they blockaded was the platforms, right? They were organized. These people met each other through any way they would have met each other, right? As working within the same. Basically, it was a platform employer, basically, but it's like an employer. So the people would meet anyway and organize.
This particular profession was traditionally invisible in Greece, right? No one cared about delivery riders. They didn't have even formal representation in first-level unions.
Caballeros.
In Greece?
Yeah, Caballeros was the name of the union, of the base union.
It's the base union. It was a grass.
Yeah, it was grass.
Exactly.
No first class.
No, first level.
No, first level by Greek standards. Yeah.
But because they disseminated their condition through social media to the society, it's like the society transfused them what, in a Bourdieuian term we would call resistance capital. Because they made it, and the society admitted that their situation is wrong, and they boosted them. And the next day we have for the first time a strike of delivery riders, thousands.
So to say something, I think that we try to reinvent the wheel here. I mean, what Alik presented, which is an old school urban reclaim the right, reclaim the city movement. What Dolores presented, which is a worker struggle. It is very similar, if it is not the same, as what happened with the movements through the platform. Why? Okay, it's a fourth industrial revolution, digital first industrial revolution movement, which used the platform, but it's again a workers' mobilization. It's basically the infrastructure itself, which is challenged, it's the terrain of the struggle, which was always the case. If you take original social theory, Marxist theory, labor is part of infrastructure. Of course, we forgot it because we have very capitalist definition of infrastructure, and we think that's all economic infrastructures, roads, highways, pipelines, sewage, and all this stuff. But the reality is that labor was always part of infrastructure in the original theory of infrastructure. So I'm not. You see what I mean? I'm thinking here all the debate. For example, I also think that what Emilia or what Erika presented, although you would think that there are two very different things, it is the administration of a social state, Finland, like, you know, the paradigmatic social policy state for European social democratic state, and how the waterways were used and emerged there. And Emilia, you have workers' rights in Viome, and how the skills of the water basically is the necessary part of infrastructure. But again, we're talking about, you know, without pretending that everything is infrastructure, we talk about similar aspects of the same phenomena. I think we overemphasize, if you want, the value of digital. It's the same as we share with social media studies. The anthropology of social media, the whole idea is that basically social media do not change. You're not a second person, you're not a different person. You don't do new things in social media. You do what you were always doing with extended capacities given to you from technology. It doesn't mean that if you are an asshole in real life, offline life, you will be an asshole online as well, right? It's not going to change.
The information flows in a pregnant next speed. That's the new thing.
I think more in the audience, we should have a dialogue. Is this Oslo? Perhaps the people online, do you have some questions, objections, or comments?
It's really difficult to hear. Can you move the camera towards the audience or something? Because I've been just listening to some voices, but then some of the comments were too far away to catch. So
It is your fault because you was moving while talking. Sorry, you're right. Okay. Sorry. No, I think you are right. The comments, if anybody has comments from the audience, would be nice if they come up here next to the microphone. Erika, could you share what was said in the stage between Yorgos and myself for the last 3-4 minutes?
Yeah, I guess 70%. Yeah, because it was a conversation, and the one side of the conversation was a bit too far.
It's him, right? I bet it was him. Okay. Okay, Erika, sorry, you are right. Do you have any questions, objections, or comments, our online participants?
Yeah, I think I have a comment.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, regarding your question, I mean, I would like to add another aspect. It's a question also of scale and, so to say, complexity. I mean, all of our presentations, also ours and our colleagues as well, were built around types of infrastructure that more or less are well known and easy, so to say, to handle. Even the VMF factory, even their infrastructure, their machinery, is not something really advanced, so to say. It's more or less machinery that is used for the production of a wide range of products, be it construction materials, be it cleaning products, and so on and so forth. But what happens when we upscale this question, so to say? When we talk about networks of logistics or networks of flow of information, I mean, there's no way to, and also I would like to remind here that all those networks are decentralized. There's not one single actor controlling their totality, so to say. So you have there multiple stakeholders. Then there's no such thing as capitalism as a unified whole. I mean, it's always a matter of particles and fragments and relations among those fragments. So it's not really easy to conceptualize a unique uniform definition of infrastructure. So that's the question here. I mean, what's the scale, what's the complexity, and so on and so forth. And also that there is a sort of say temporal aspect here. I mean, I would like to bring forth a really weird example, but I believe it says a lot. I mean, frigates. Frigates are the warships first used during the 15th century by the great powers, the great colonial powers, to handle trade, triangular trade, and the global trade in general. It took the pirates 200 years, 1.5 century, to learn how to capture and convert those ships that are technological marvels of their era for their own ends. It took them 200 years. I mean, that's a whole lot of time, in my opinion, at least. So there's also this question here. I mean, how can movements of solidarity, how can a grassroots movement in general learn how to utilize to their own ends types and aspects of infrastructure is something that remains to be seen. I mean, in my opinion, at least, I think we haven't seen it all yet. I mean, especially considering new tech, we haven't seen how it is possible for movements in a large scale to occupy and utilize those vast networks of infrastructure, even in a fractional scale, in a fractional scale, so to say. So
I have the impression that a great part of the answer came from Michael's paper. I think Michael's paper had something which was very interesting. It was very ethnographic in some ways, but so something which is well known in anthropology of infrastructure, that we think that these black boxes which function perfectly well, but it's actually the human factor is pretty crucial, even for infrastructure which are super close, like the road tolls. Like suppose you cannot see the road tolls, right? But there are also the human dimension which makes cheating easier or more difficult or alternative, etc., etc., etc. So I think that, you know, doing research with, for example, truck drivers, or even knowing a truck driver, you know that they always know the back streets to avoid the tolls. They can, a good truck driver is the one who will cross half of Europe from Thessaloniki port to Ireland, basically to Belfast port, and pay as little tolls as possible. And it is possible if you know your way around, right?
Absolutely.
At least I have done it to a great extent. So I think that it is really interesting how the infrastructure and the way that this is what I'm saying when it's a position, of course, it's part of a dialogue which we hope to expand towards a negative volume, a special issue coming out of this panel. The online people who will inform you in writing, the offline people who are present, if they have some time after the panel, I invite them in the grass to have a coffee and chat about it. But I think that it is really important to take these things to account. Personally, it's a position, but I may be wrong. I'm not a master in here in authority, but I think that we overemphasize the material dimensions of infrastructure, while still the basic part of infrastructure is labor. So it's the human factor, in fact. But I may be wrong on that, and perhaps we can have a dialogue, a more constructive dialogue through written papers and published papers and published conversation in the near future. We're running out of time and we'll have to leave this room. So do we have a question, or last, we have 1 more minute for a question, objection, or comment? Did someone have a hand up? Yes, please, Alik.
Well, for me, the question, or an interesting question to inquire, would be how and which types of solidarity infrastructure hinders or facilitates. And when I see that mass mobilization, for example, forced cities to split up the different usages, and I'm seeing the political mobilizations that there's bikers, pedestrians, and car users, car drivers. So I see that mobilizations are fostering like very separated solidarities. And then, of course, it's very easy to just talk about irresponsibility of bikers, for example, and don't pose the structural questions. So it's not a either or, but a how and which types of solidarity, I guess.
I want to thank you everybody for being here. We really have to leave this room. I'm very concerned about time, as far as you have noticed probably by now. I would like to invite the speakers to remain behind if they don't have, if they could, even for a few minutes, and come to the class. The people online, I will email you. Good having you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, you do your thing. Thank you.